All right. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we discuss the principles behind the plans. As always, I'm one of your hosts. My name is Dave.
And my name is Jeff. And of course, we've introduced ourselves a lot, but I'm the lead pastor at Allison Park Church. Dave's my son, also campus pastor at our Northside campus. And thank you so much. If you have been one of our listeners recently, we know our audience is growing, and we just want to say we're really glad that we can engage with you in this way.
And we want to give a special thanks to those of you who have left us 5-star reviews recently. So shout outs to Crap Flaps, thank you. This is a long name, Living the Deep Down Life, and Anastasia Gibson. Thank you to all three of you for leaving 5-star reviews.
Thank you so much.
That helps us to kind of get the word out, you know. And if you would like to have your name shouted out, it's very simple. Just go on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review, write something, you know, in there, and we'll get you on here. So
yeah, thanks for your support of the podcast. And we're gonna talk about something today that kind of came up in a conversation I was a part of yesterday. I was in Ohio, and I was with some lead pastors of larger churches, and we were having lunch together. And the question came up that is being asked all over the place right now by pastors, which is, are your people coming back to church? Right, because of the pandemic, we were locked down, and then for a little while it's been online, and it's been in-person combination. So that was a really robust conversation. And then just recently, one of the great informative blogs out there today and podcasts actually is Carey Nieuwhof.
Yeah.
And just I think a couple of days ago, he wrote a blog post. You want to give the title of that, Dave?
Yeah, I actually don't have the title right here. The title was 10 Reasons Even Committed Christians Are Attending Church Less Often.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously pastors are concerned about their people, and we're trying to figure out how to do ministry effectively. And so Carey Nieuwhof outlines the fact that there are some reasons why even the most committed Christians are in person in church less often than they were before. And so as we're looking at life, we're trying to figure out, what does this mean? Is this a good trend? Is it a bad trend? Is it a sign of spiritual apathy? Is it more just that we've added more menu items to the list in most cases, where people actually have more at their fingertips so that they're growing more? I talked to one pastor also in Ohio, and I asked him, I said, so are you back to pre-pandemic numbers? He pastors a great church in Columbus, Ohio, and actually Greg Ford, one church. And I said, so are you guys back to pre-pandemic numbers? And he said, well, I think we have more people attending our church once a month. So there's more bodies that are belonging to us, I shouldn't say bodies, more individuals and families that are belonging to us than there was before. But the people who are coming less often, and many more are engaging at least part-time online. Mm-hmm. And so I said, is that a win for you? And he said, I don't know, but we're trying to figure it out. We're actually researching, spending some money to do some research to find out how to engage with people better. So most churches and most pastors are really scratching their heads trying to figure out how this all works.
Yeah, an alternative title that you had is...
well, okay.
You feel nervous for me saying this, but the alternative title that I thought was hilarious was, is online church healthy, or are people just being lazy?
I think that's the question all pastors are asking in their mind is, are people attending online because it is a true, meaningful experience for them, or are they just too lazy to get out of bed?
Right.
So, and that's a really direct, blunt kind of way of putting it. And I think we actually have to talk about this particular issue from two vantage points to be appropriate here. We need to talk about it from the vantage point of the pastor. What's the pastor thinking about how they should take steps to grow their church effectively? But then I don't think we just want to look at it from the pastor's point of view, because, let's just face it. There is the potential that some pastors are interested just in numbers because their ego is diminished because they don't have as many people sitting there listening to them preach. Well, that's not a spiritual value. Okay, that just is a personal adjustment that you have to make in terms of the methodology that's now working or not working. What we really want to ask the question, and maybe you're not a pastor at all, but you're saying, well, I attend church online, to some degree, and I'm probably not in person as often as I used to be. So we really want to ask the question from that perspective. What would we recommend as pastors for your spiritual health?
Yeah, what's really healthy? Because honestly, if I wasn't a pastor, I'm sure sometimes I'd attend online.
Okay.
It's so convenient.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I don't miss COVID, like lockdown, when we would just have to watch online. That was the most disengaging kind of, you're like, all right, like I don't want to miss church, so I'm going to get on here. But at the same time, it was just like worshiping online is not as easy as it is when you're in the room with people. And so I don't miss that. But I'm sure that there would be some days I wake up and it's a beautiful day. I'm like, yeah, let's just watch church online, and then we'll go get brunch somewhere or something, you know? So I do understand it. In fact, we offer church online. Like, we still do. I don't think we're condemning it.
And every pastor, I was at this lunch yesterday, every pastor in the room was offering church online, had a robust online experience available to everybody, all of which has grown significantly in the last 2 years, which they weren't necessarily downplaying. They were just asking the question, is this good? Is this healthy? Is this church? What's missing? Is anything missing? And these are all the questions I think the pastors are asking. And I actually think that church people should be asking that, you know, like you said, if you weren't a pastor, a person like yourself who is thinking, well, this is going to be a part of my experience because it is very convenient. Is convenience a good motivator? And when does convenience as a motivation undercut the effect that you're trying to produce in your own spiritual life? Those are some of the things that I think we're going to wrestle with. So I don't know what you want to start with. There are these 10 things Carey Nieuwhof mentioned. We can go there. Or do you want to explore
I was just thinking about that. So kind of throughout this episode, some of the things we'll do, we'll talk about Carey Nieuwhof's article about the 10 reasons even committed people are attending church less often. We'll also talk about how healthy is it to engage in church from a distance. There's even a new model of virtual church called the Metaverse.
Metaverse. Should you be in the Metaverse?
That we'll dive into.
Would you have to use an Oculus to be in the Metaverse?
Some sort of a device like an Oculus. By the way, somebody else talked about that, and for a second I thought they were talking about the multiverse. I was like, what kind of a podcast would that be? Like the Church of the Multiverse?
Churches for Aliens, Dave.
It's like Doctor Strange. There's a different version of me watching church online right now.
By the way, a little detour. You know, we did the podcast, actually 2 of them on aliens, science, and the future of Christianity, and I noticed that the government is now coming out saying the information you have about UFOs is just the tip of the iceberg, and they're actually getting ready to hold hearings.
Really?
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, they're going to hold congressional hearings on the UFO findings. So stay tuned. There may be a future alien podcast to come, right? So
what is the theology of aliens? What would we call that? Alienology. That's just a study, I think. Yeah. All right. So aliens part 3, maybe down the pipe.
Yeah, but
it's kind of a good summer topic.
For people my age and older, can you just define Metaverse and Oculus? Because those 2 things might be people like, I like your podcast, but I understood the last one with the theology things better than that, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, they're essentially these headsets that you'll put on. You might have seen them in commercials.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're these big white ones that go over your eyes, and it essentially has a little screen on there that projects a 3D image. And so if you turn your head, it's different over here and over there. And so there's a model of church right now where you will essentially walk into a virtual space with these goggles on, and you can attend church, you can talk to people, it's almost like it's a big constructed space with worship and a screen. It's interesting.
Yeah, so it's a virtual world, Metaverse, right? And so you have a church planted in the virtual world where people can, through their device, have a 3D experience. There used to be something before called Second Life. Wasn't that what it was years ago?
I don't know.
Okay.
Isn't that from The Office? Is that what you're talking about? I thought that was just a fake thing.
It was a virtual world without the Oculus effect.
Oh, okay.
And you would get your avatar that represented you.
Yeah.
And Craig Rochelle's church, Life Church, actually had a church in
I
that
did
world.
not know that.
Yeah, they actually did. So you could actually walk into the concourse or the foyer space and greet somebody else. So saw this tiger avatar walk in, and a dude with a guitar on his back, and they would talk to you. Then they'd go in and sit, and then the screen would come up, and it would be Craig preaching, just like at any other video venue campus that they had started. Yeah. So there are seminars right now being put on, I think by Leadership Network, on how to think about and maybe consider starting churches in the metaverse.
Yeah,
where you would attend in a virtual world rather than in person, or even an online broadcast. It's like another category of church now.
Yes, that's a big old preview, but I think before we get into that,
Yeah.
why don't we talk about the 10
10,
reasons?
okay.
Because probably if we just talk about online church and then our conclusions, this would be
Yeah.
out of
Pointless.
order. Okay, yeah. So Carey talks about 10 reasons why even committed people are attending church less. I think they're actually really insightful.
Yeah.
I was sort of reading this like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think some of this might be based on his demographic that he's talking about. Because
Okay.
the first one says greater affluence. He talks about how money gives people options, and that for a lot of people, the middle class is becoming more of the upper class. I think a lot of what I've seen is probably a lot of middle class not becoming upper class, but it might just be depending on where you are. But
Yeah.
greater affluence might be a reason. Higher focus on kids' activities. When I was a youth pastor, that was all the time. Like youth ministry, like our services Wednesday night were a lot lower on the list than homework, sports.
Well, it used to be that the sports leagues in a local community would have respect for Sunday church. They wouldn't schedule anything on a Sunday because they didn't want to compete with church activities. Somewhere in your growing up years, that changed.
Yep.
And so parents were having to choose. Okay, so that's actually part of the reason why some people like the fact that we have a Saturday night service is that they had an option before we were so online to be able to have their kid play in a Little League game on a Sunday morning, but still make it to church
Right.
on a Saturday night. Yep.
Okay, so that was number 2, higher focus on kids' activities. Then there was more travel. People have a little more money so they can get around more
Which,
often.
by the way, this is something I hear all the time, and I think other pastors would probably agree with this. I was on vacation, I was on the beach, but I was watching your message.
Yeah.
So in that sense, online church actually helps people, because most of the time when people go on vacation, they would not even think of their home church. They might go to another church in town, but online gives people, as they travel, a chance to stay engaged with their local church, even though they're at a distance.
sure.
I think that everybody would say that's a positive.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. More travel. Number 4, blended and single parent families. He had a really good quote here where he talked about, in a shared custody situation, perfect attendance for a kid might be 26 Sundays a year, because of the way it works out. So that might be a reason. 5 is online options. We'll get into all of that. 6 is interesting. The cultural disappearance of guilt. Is this a good or a bad thing?
Yeah. So in my era, if you didn't go to church on a weekend, you felt some level of guilt.
Yeah.
You knew that there was some level of accountability. Your pastor might be thinking, "Where are you? Why aren't you here today?" But it wasn't just so. As a pastor's kid, it wasn't just Sunday morning. It was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and sometimes prayer meetings, and sometimes men's and women's conferences, and so there was a sense of obligation to your local church that you would be present, especially if you were a leader or a board member or a pastor's kid, that you would need to be in church. But I don't think that's a factor at all anymore.
True.
Yeah.
And it's probably good that it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think guilt-based pressure is the best way to
Right.
go.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Shame's better.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. The evolved version of
Just
guilt.
kidding. Okay, don't take that seriously.
Okay. Then we have self-directed spirituality. It's this
Yes.
idea that people do their own research and that they don't have as much trust in an organization or institution to tell them what they need.
Or it might just be, okay, so they're with their local church on a weekend, but they are supplementing. There's so many great communicators out there, so much great worship music out there. So they're listening to their pastor and they're participating in their church, but they're also filling their life with stuff like what we're doing right now, podcasts and
Michael Todd, Stephen Furtick,
the great preachers of our era.
Sure.
And so what can be dangerous there is it might be things that are not Christian too, like things that may be a little. Maybe if you presented it to your pastor, he or she might say, "I don't know if that's a good idea." So people are becoming a little syncretistic and mixing things sometimes, which can be very confusing.
Right. Okay, 3 more. 8 is failure to see a direct benefit. People always value the things they see most, or
Okay.
people make time for things they value most is what he talks about.
Right.
So sometimes they're like, I'm not even sure why being in person or being in church every single Sunday is a direct benefit. Number 9, valuing attendance over engagement, and that's a church fault.
Yeah.
The churches would rather have numbers of the people that are necessarily involved. And then number 10, this is a little more vague, a massive culture shift that, in general, we're seeing culture shift away from being in church consistently for probably a bunch of different
For
reasons.
years it's becoming less and less and less.
Right.
So those are all valid reasons. So obviously this isn't a single issue complication. There are many, many things that weigh into this.
Which one of those 10 stands out to you?
Which of the 10 reasons why people are not coming to church? Okay, so the ones that are understandable are children's activities, more travel. Those are understandable. Self-directed spirituality, where you're adding to. I think all of that is not necessarily a negative. The greater affluence part is always a concern, because I think in the history of Christianity, the church has not flourished in moments where affluence was so strong, because it has a tendency to bring both distractions and apathy. Okay, so I think that's a concern to me. But then I think probably the confusing one, not the concerning one, is just the online piece. So where does that fit in, right? So is online healthy? Like one pastor I was with yesterday said, if online is not the healthiest, maybe I should just shut it down. Maybe I should just say, we're not going to do online anymore. If you want to be a part of this church, then you got to come in person, period, and we're not going to do online anymore.
Right.
He wasn't ready to do that, because that would be an enormous loss, because a lot of people, before they attend a church, they'll watch online 3 or 4 times.
Yeah,
In fact, most of the people that I meet are coming to Allison Park for the first time, have already been a part of our services online, and they say, "Oh, Pastor Jeff," they know who I am already. They're like, "Oh, we've been watching you online for off and on for 6 months, and we decided finally to come and check it out in person." So I think most churches are not ready to get rid of the online option in any way, shape, or form. But I think pastors are having some serious questions about, is this the healthiest way to function? So
wait, before we get into that, can I say what stands out to me from this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So whenever I was looking at this, I think there's sort of a general theme that he breaks down a lot throughout this. People have more options. They have other priorities, other things going on in their life, right? And I think the one that stood out to me when I'm reading through this is the not understanding the direct benefit. And I think that's a big part of the conversation we'll get into with the online part. But it's like, there's always been, even before online, this contingency of people that are like, well, I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And it's like, technically, but that's not a healthy way to live. It's not what's prescripted for us according to the Bible, you know what I mean, to be in a community. But I think it's fascinating to me that people don't necessarily see the direct value of being in church consistently. And that, I think as a pastor, that sort of makes me go, like, what do we do about that? Because, okay, the Bible doesn't talk about the weekend model, 52 Sundays a year kind of a thing, but there's a clear focus on being a part of a community of believers to make an impact, to grow together, probably to do all those 4 things we talk about, right? Experience God, live connected, discover purpose, and make a difference.
Right.
And I think if people are less engaged, they're not necessarily, I don't know, I'm wondering, like, is church becoming just a side dish? Is it becoming just like an add-on? I mean, we've been preaching about this, right?
Yeah, So what I recognize is that I preach more on a big word, ecclesiology, which is the study of the church, the theology of the church. Ecclesia is the Greek word that we use for church, called out of darkness and into community, into His light. Okay, so I probably preached more on ecclesiology the last 2 years than I ever had in my life, because I felt like I needed to give people a framework for what was happening. So first we were saying the church is more than a building when we were on lockdown, because we wanted to say you can be the church right where you are, even if you can't get to the building. Then once we opened up, it was like, look, come back to the church, because the church is more than just sitting at home by yourself, right? So both of those things are true at the same time. But maybe we could ask the question, so what is it that I feel like I am not getting when I'm just having an online experience that I do get when I'm in person? So I'll just tell you, one of the things that happened for me was it was June of 2020. This is one of the very first moments we came back out and we were in person. We were extremely socially distanced, but finally we're in the same room with a live worship team, and we're worshiping. And I started crying. Like, I was like, wow, there is a dimension. Jesus says, if 2 or more gather in the same place and agree upon anything in my name, there I am with them. So there is something about being with other people in person that increases the experience with God's presence. So I was like, man, did I miss this? It wasn't just sentimentality. I felt the presence of God in a stronger way in person with other people than I did at home in my living room. And when I watch online, I get up and I pace around and I put myself in to the worship experience. Like I'm not washing the dishes and watching church. Like I'm in.
Right.
Like I don't know how everybody does it, but that for me, I'm all in. But I really missed being in the presence of God.
Yeah.
I think the Holy Spirit's operation is increased when you're in person. That doesn't mean that you can't be baptized in the Holy Spirit or flooded with His presence alone,
Sure.
and at home and online. It just means that there is something special about being with other people. That's one thing. What else would you say that if you're missing if you're not with other people?
So I think that one danger is just the idea of consumerism.
Okay.
Like whenever I'm watching online, I'm here to hear an encouraging, inspiring word. I'm here to get a worship experience. It's like you're fueling up at the gas tank, but there's not necessarily that level of engagement. And that does not just mean engagement as in with the community or doing all of that's great. Like serving our community, making a positive change, spreading the kingdom, all that's great. But even just the rubbing shoulders with people and like engaging in a church. I think being a part of a church, the practice is maybe at least as much rubbing shoulders with other Christians at various stages of their own spiritual maturity and on their journey than it is the worship experience or than it is the message. And so like when you're doing that at a distance, it almost feels like you're sort of cutting out half of the part of what church is, which is relationships.
Yeah. So you can't walk by somebody and see their face downcast and say, "Are you all right?"
Yeah.
You can't. Okay, so we say engage in the chat, which there's a level of engagement.
Sure.
You can even say, after this is over, we're going to open up a Zoom room where you can have some conversations with people. There is still something about, I was talking with somebody this past week and I could see that they looked bothered. And I said, "Are you all right?" And they said, "I'm really going through something with my family right now." And I said, "Can we talk?" Right. And so we sat and then I prayed. And there was an impact that happened. So and I think this is one of the problems with how we view church to begin with anymore. And that is, I don't think you should go there just because you're going to receive something. I think you should go there prepared to contribute something, not financially, although that's a part of it.
Sure, yeah.
But you contribute to someone else in the room. Like you go to say, "Today, God, use me. Lord, I'm going to church today. Help me to see the people you want me to see. Help me to speak a word of encouragement." 1 Corinthians 14 talks about when you come together, everybody has something, a word, a psalm, a song, a word of prophecy, something that they're going to offer to the room so that it is a community experience and not a spectator's experience, which I think the American church model has become more of a, like I'm going to a show rather than I'm participating in some kind of community activity.
Yeah, I think trying to attract people based on an experience that they can come and receive and have imparted into them is what a lot of people think about when they think of church. In fact, we've had conversations about this, that there was a long time, and when we're still a little bit in this, but when like the main idea for the church model was like, let's be less weirdly religious. Like we want to show people that we're normal, you can be a part of our church, and so we're going to do a modern worship experience with like haze and lights and modern guitars and, as the meme is, skinny jeans. All skinny jeans pastors with tattoos. You know what I mean? But it was like normalizing it. But then I think part of it is maybe throughout all of that, we became a little too focused on some of the attractional stuff so that people are thinking this is an experience. They want me to come and maybe not necessarily be entertained, but at the same time be entertained, with like a godly entertainment. And I don't think that anybody would state like that's all church is. But I think
those are the churches we watch online, right? So no one's watching. So I should say this. Most of the churches that are attractive to watch online are churches that are designed that way,
sure.
right? So very few, unless you are really devoted to a liturgical approach,
right,
are going online to watch a liturgical approach.
By liturgical, you mean?
Okay, so some people. So I was just with a group of people from a local Lutheran church, and they were talking about how their numbers have not come back up, and they've become older as a congregation. And so, they didn't have a pastor at the moment, and we were talking, and they said, so I said, "Well, who preaches for you?" And they said, "Well, If we don't have a fill-in pastor, someone will get an article from a Christian magazine that has some scripture in it, and they'll read that as the homily. So for some people who are Christians, they do not go to church for the experience. They don't go to church because they want to hear a sermon that's delivered by a great communicator, or that they want to hear great musicianship. They go for the consistency of the routine. There's a liturgy, there's a reading, then there's a prayer, then there's a reading, and there's a prayer. And the homily is just part of the routine. It doesn't necessarily stand out. Or
Homily
the
is
sermon.
the message.
Yeah, the message doesn't stand out. Now, a lot of people your age look at the liturgy as unengaging.
Some of them do. Some of them are really into it.
Okay, well, there tends to be a trend away from it, which is why a lot of liturgical churches are in a death cycle now.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so people are not typically online going through the liturgy, because part of the liturgy is saying it together.
Yeah.
So you want to be in the room for a liturgy, right? You want to be there to be able to say it together and kneel
Where
together
you have
and
these
stand
books
together.
and you read from this page, you read a prayer or a song.
Okay,
Yeah.
so most of the people who are watching online are watching the best communicators and best musicians.
Right.
And it's like, if I'm going to tune in online, I want it to be aesthetically pleasing. I don't want to hear someone singing off key, right? I don't want someone droning on for an hour and a half. Like, they want it to be done really well. Okay, so the churches that are functioning like that have put their product, so to speak, and I know that's not how we should say it, online, and people are like, that's awesome. I love this. I love this. I want to be a part of this. But it can be that this becomes a substitute for community.
Yeah.
So consumeristic Christianity is different from community-based Christianity. And it is possible to get great input, teaching, etc., and not have robust relationships where you are essential to the process.
Okay, I'm going to throw a big curveball question at you right now.
Yeah.
Because I'm not even sure. So when we talk about this, you know, people that aren't necessarily always engaging in the church community, does your primary community need to be in the church? Or can it be that your primary community, like, you don't have a lot of good Christian friends, but you're in the secular workplace, you have good friends there, but you get your fix, you get your fill up from church, whether that's attending or it's online? Like, I think that's part of the question. Does your primary community need to be church people?
That's a good question.
I knew I was going to stump you with that one.
Why don't you? What's your thought on that? I have a prejudice about it. I'm not sure that it is a biblical one. That's why I'm pausing for a moment. Do you want me to give you my initial thought?
Sure. Yeah.
No, it's not enough.
Yeah. No, it's not enough to not have your community in the church.
Well, so as I see the New Testament, Jesus, when he started the church, intended the church to be the primary vehicle on earth through which his work was done. We as the church represent the body of Christ. Okay, here's the other part of this. If I have my primary community in my workplace with people that I get along with and like, and then I'm feeding myself through an online experience, here's what you end up with. You end up with a community formed in your own image. The church is not just made up of the people you like.
Yeah.
It's made up of the people who you need to love.
Wow.
Okay,
you got to say that again for people in the back.
Yeah. So look, I might not like hanging out with a 92-year-old man who is at the end of his life, who's going to talk to me for a long time about things I might not be able to relate to, because maybe he's not completely thinking clearly anymore.
Yeah.
But he is in my church.
Yeah.
And I need to be there for him.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So I might not like the middle schooler who's annoying. Right? Like, I'm not going to hang out with, but that middle schooler is in a formative stage of his or her life and needs someone to be there serving on a serve team for the middle school service so that we can raise the next generation up with a solid self-esteem and an understanding for who Christ is. So the church is not your friend group.
Yeah.
You need to have a friend group within your church.
Yeah, sure.
And you need to have a friend group outside your church.
Right.
But if you're not committed to the body of Christ, which is people that are various racial backgrounds, generations, political affiliations, like you can't get in there and really love like Jesus loved unless you belong to the called out ones that now belong to Christ, where we're representing Jesus on earth.
Yeah.
So no,
So
you
good.
can't do that. Not and say you're really a part of the church.
You know,
you're
yeah.
thinking it from a very self-centered perspective to say the church is about where I find my fit, where I find my feeding.
Well, but part of the problem is we talk like that all the time.
We do. I know it's probably
I
my
hate
fault.
that. I'm not even saying it's your fault. Okay, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but and I think maybe other people feel this too. Sometimes what I have a real aversion to, in general, I think the Western church sometimes has this carrot on a stick Christianity. Here's why you should do what God asked you to do. And I'm like, part of me is like, but shouldn't we just do it because God asked us to do it? Like if we're actually followers of Jesus, like does there always need to be like God is doing this to maximize your savings? You know what I mean? Like if you put this in, like sometimes it is doing things that suck
You
because
invented a new word there, maximalize.
maximize.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, so there's a tension between that. You want to market. I actually remember back in the late 1980s, there was a book out called Marketing Your Ministry.
Yeah.
And there was a big debate over should we be using marketing terms in the church or is that dumbing things down?
Yeah.
But obviously the marketing campaign won and everybody markets everywhere. I mean, we market on Facebook and we market our events and we market our sermon series and we market our worship music and everything is marketed now. We live in a culture where that resonates with people. And most people want to know why. Like if you say, well, why should I come to this? Most people want to know why. So in articulating the why, we often are saying it in terms of this is why you'll like this. This is why it'll benefit you. But if all we do is give them the why for them and we never lead them into the why for the world or the why for Christ, then we aren't really making mature Christians and we aren't building mature churches.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think when we get back to the online question, we should ask the question, is what you're doing as a personal church attendance habit helping you fulfill the why of Christianity?
Yeah.
And is it making you a spiritually mature believer or more of a consumeristic believer?
So
because it is probably possible in a personal way to answer that question. Because some people might be immunocompromised, still concerned about COVID-19 or shut in. And you're like, boy, I would love to be able to re-engage, but I can't. And so I have finding ways to intentionally fulfill what God wants me to do and become a more Christian from this posture. Or I'm traveling, like I have a job that just takes me out of town. What do you want me to do? I can't be there all the time. Okay, so there probably is a way for people in certain situations to find a way to intentionally build their life effectively and use online as a part of the menu, which I think is a really great part of the menu. But if it's not intentional, I think that's where the problem comes from.
Let's cycle back to the whole community in a church thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a lot of where this is coming from. It's especially where a lot of this online discussion is. Is this healthy? Because the main thing you're missing is community.
Yeah.
Everything else is basically still there, but the community part is at the very best, it's probably a lot weaker of a more diluted of a form, we'll say, of community.
But a lot of people were doing church without community before.
True.
You come in at the last minute, leave at the first moment,
Absolutely.
never engage with anybody. It's a me and God kind of a thing. And so whether you're doing that approach to Christianity in person or online, you're missing community.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. But like we were just talking about this thought's still kind of like bouncing around in my head a little bit. We're talking about like a Christian community. I think one of those things that we talk about as being a really unattractive thing that we need to try to avoid. Like we just had Preston Ulmer on with the Doubters Club, and he talks about this in his book, and I agree with him. Like we don't want to be a Christian club. We want to have relationships with people that aren't following Jesus, and I 100% agree. But I actually think that at least in our part of the world, where we are in the northeastern United States, I think that there's a lot more people that have their primary group, in fact, maybe their only community, really as people that aren't really following Jesus with a little bit of church, than there is people that are only church people that don't know any non-Christians. That feels like it's a lot less of a.
Well, and I think it's you need to be a person that has both. Maybe I would say my primary relationships are people who are following Christ, who are influencing me to follow Christ better. But I have 1B, if that's 1A. 1B is I have vibrant relationships with people who don't know Christ, with whom I do life so that I can live a life that's based on love and share Christ with them, right? Okay, so I think those two things are essential. And if you find yourself with no Christian friends that are really challenging to grow, or no non-Christian friends, then you're probably missing something from your spiritual life, because both of those are communities that are important. But what you really need is to immerse yourself somewhere, whether it's to serve with preschool kids and have community with the workers you're with, or to get involved with a youth ministry, or to be on a worship team, or be on a production staff.
Get in a life group.
Or as a support group, helping people get free from addiction, or to serve with senior citizens, a part of our prime timers, or something where, even if it's just a Bible study where you then as a group pray for one another and serve in some way outside of your group. I think everybody needs that kind of community to be able to be robust. And then when you have communion together, this is one of the things that we recently changed. For a little while, we would say, okay, we're going to now have communion. If you happen to be watching online and be at home, go and get some crackers and juice and celebrate with us. We stopped saying that because communion really is designed to be face-to-face and in person. So for our online campus, we said, after this communion service, we're going to have a Zoom meeting so that you at least have some community while you're taking communion.
Right.
And it isn't just a consumer moment, because communion was never supposed to be a disconnected thing.
Yeah.
So, but I actually think there is another thing that you're missing. So if you're not in person, I do think you miss some of the most powerful Holy Spirit outpouring moments.
True.
So actually, I just read today, Carey Nieuwhof, who we quoted him earlier, wrote a follow-up blog to this one, which is why charismatic churches are increasing in number in person and no other demographic is. Charismatic Pentecostal, which emphasizes service is always a little different because you never know what the Holy Spirit's going to do.
Sure.
And there is great passion in the worship.
Right.
And there tends to be an emphasis on the presence of God in the room, which then says, well, you can't do that quite online like you can in person. So I think the relationship with God in His presence, and relationship with other people in community is what you tend to miss if you become too consumeristic in your online approach. However, I'll just say we're all in on online. And and if you're on vacation or you're traveling, or this is just where you are with your health right now, we aren't trying to be critical of that. We just are saying be intentional. Whatever your approach to your spiritual life is, you should be intentional.
We didn't actually even throw this out there. So online church, we need to get there, right? Like virtual church, VR church, metaverse, watching online almost exclusively. So what are our thoughts on this? I know you've sort of been sprinkling throughout, like balanced diet, this kind of stuff.
So I'm pro innovation. If someone wants to put a church in the metaverse, I think go for it. Let's figure it out later. See if it works, and how we could do online church. I'm pro innovation. I'm not against anything. I know some churches. I think there's one church on the West Coast that went on all online. They closed their actual physical locations and went online completely, and are doing more home-based watch parties. I don't know, maybe that's not the right term now, but so there's a broad spectrum of what's going on around the world. And I will just add this one thing. There are some people who are online at Allison Park Church and still very much intentional. So there's three people in Michigan who started watching and participating, worshiping with us online during the pandemic. And they decided they wanted to become a part of Allison Park Church. So they joined a Zoom small group. They went through Next Steps online. They went through the Difference Makers course. They became members. But when they decided to get water baptized, because they came to Christ through the ministry of Allison Park Church, they drove from Michigan to Hampton campus and got baptized here in person.
Wow.
We were able to celebrate with them. Then they drove back home to Michigan and continue to participate with us online. When we hold Sisterhood Conference, the ladies in this family, they drive into Pittsburgh to participate in Sisterhood Conference. So we are truly their church family, and they are extremely intentional about it.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is, because there isn't a life-giving church in their own town, a great example of how intentional online church attendance can be maximized.
Right.
Okay. So, but then there's probably the broad spectrum. And you know in your heart if what you're doing is you going all in with Jesus, or if it's become a little bit like,
your crutch.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe that's a good thing to just ask yourself, and that is, is my current patterns leading to me being a more devoted follower of Jesus Christ, a more active part of what he's doing on earth through his church? And is it the best that I can give? Yeah.
So I think the question as pastors that maybe you have not answered yet, that you guys were all talking about yesterday, if we have a vibrant online community, do we tell them it's enough? If not, how do we get them to plug into the next step?
I think that there is not an easy, simple answer to that question, and that's why no one's figured that out yet.
Sure.
What we just talked about for the last however many minutes.
40 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, it's why it's so complicated. And if you get up and you just throw down, you're like, I'm telling you, come back to church right now. You're going to put an unnecessary guilt and shame on people who are really trying to do their best with what they have today. But if you don't put out there some challenge to say, hey, you know what? Come on. There's no reason for you not to be engaged by now. That may be what message certain people need to hear. And so, I did bump into somebody a number of months ago, and I said, hey, how are you? I haven't seen you in so long. I wasn't meaning to be condemning. I was just actually asking. And they instantly got this look on their face, and they said, yeah, we just got out of the habit of going to church. And we watch you most weekends and everything. But honestly, if I'm just going to admit, we're just being lazy. So they said that right out loud. And I said, okay, I'm not trying to condemn you. I just missed you. I'm glad to know you're still part of Allison Park Church, because sometimes I don't know who's still with me and who's not. I'm glad to know. And if you ever need anything,
sure,
let me know. We want to pray for you. And I thought that maybe after that conversation, I'd see them regularly, but no.
Yeah.
It is just like they said, I'm out of the habit. And so I think you can see this in a lot of different ways. Like, for instance, I was much more devoted to going to Planet Fitness to work out before the pandemic. I'm much more likely to work out at home today. It just feels more, like you said, convenient. And I think some people are looking at church that way too. Like, I can get both in. Like, get on the treadmill. I can watch Allison Park Church. I do both at the same time.
When you get to Allison Park Church and Planet Fitness, that's what we really need to do.
Save some time, make it happen, eat my breakfast, I go on with my day. That may not be enough to really be everything that God's trying to make you to be engaged with community like you need to. But again, I think it's more of a question that you have to ask regarding intentionality. And probably that's the question with pastors too. How are we using these tools intentionally and defining what place they fit in our spiritual development so that people have the right context for in-person, online, and then the approach that we take to doing everything that we do.
So some diagnostic questions based off of this people can ask themselves. Am I engaged in a Christian community?
Yep.
Am I rubbing shoulders with people that are different than me intentionally to show them love? Am I trying to make a difference in my community with my church family through service? Any other ones that we would want to throw out?
Am I going after God with all my heart and making space to be in his presence, really, really spending some time in worship and in prayer? And is this consistent and intentional? So those are all good things to ask. And as pastors, I think we have to ask the question, how are we trying to engage the people who are online with us to take steps forward? Are we making on-ramps for them to have intentional community online, like Zoom groups and other ways that people can engage? And then how are we talking to people online so that they understand that there are more things necessary to be able to grow without canceling online altogether? Because I don't think that would be a wise thing for us to do at this point.
That's good.
Yeah.
Complicated discussion, but I hope one that is helpful to you. And so, as always, since you are watching online, we appreciate you guys being our online audience, and we would love to help reach more people. So we would love it if you would recommend this, share it. Again, we talked about leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can do that on Spotify as well. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a comment. But hey, regardless of what you do, we are so glad you joined us today, and we hope you have an amazing week. We will see you guys next time.